Good morning, and we're here to teach you about setting up the TrueWeld SE2400 stud welder. Of course, we're going to assume that your electrician has hooked it up properly to power. So the machine itself, here we go. So this is our on-off switch. We rotate it clockwise to the on position, and we get a display here, and you hear that clickety-clackety, clickety-clack in the background. That was the machine going through its checks, and it actually did a lift check on the gun to make sure that the gun's actually connected and functioning. Okay, so to set up, well, you guys are shooting 7/8 headed studs. So what you're going to see here is you got this diagram here, and we go to 7/8, and we have our time and our heat. Now this is just for the like decimal and millimeters, metric. So these two columns we're not worried about. It's these two columns right here, okay? Time and heat. So it says time in seconds, 1.00. So what I'm gonna do is time. I hold this button here and I adjust with this knob here. Now I'll show you something here. You have fine and coarse adjustment, okay? So this is fine, and if you see what happens here, see, it goes down 0.01 at a time, whereas this one goes up and down 0.1. All right, so get back to fine, take it back to 1 second, and I'm just going to leave it on coarse. Okay, so amps, 7/8, 1 second, 1800 amps. So again, I hold the button in, I rotate to 1800 amps, and the fine and coarse selection also applies to that one there. All right, so I don't have any lights on. The first thing is gun setup that we want to do is to make sure that when we look down at the stud, and let's go ahead and look down right on top of the gun here, that the stud is right in the middle, okay? We'll make sure that's adjusted so the foot piece is not offset. Oop, where's the ferrule? There we go. So I want to make sure that it travels freely, okay? The gun and the stud travels freely. I would actually like to adjust this a little bit, because see how it's hitting there? See that when I release, it kind of lifts the ferrule up out of the seat? Okay, that's not good, all right? It's rubbing on the ferrule, so we want to adjust that. And to do that, we have these two screws right here and here. And so we're going to use those to go ahead and adjust screws here. Okay. Okay. And what I want to do is move this thing around so that it is dead center around that stud. This helps two things. One, it prevents any kind of interference or binding during the weld process, because what will happen is you pull the trigger, if there's too much binding, it won't even lift the stud, so you won't even get an arc. The other thing that can happen is when you pull the trigger, it goes through the weld process, but then when it times out and it goes to put the stud back down into the molten puddle, well, the stud hangs up on the ferrule, and you don't get. I just try to sneak up on it a little bit here, a little bit there on each one. And now I've got good. Yeah, okay, now I'm moving okay. All right, so now we're ready to shoot. Now the other thing we want to do is check stick out, okay? Stick out, okay, right. See what I got here? All right, on this one, I got about 3/8 of an inch, okay? Now, if I'm doing through deck, all right, that's great. If I'm welding, I want 3/8 of an inch. If I'm welding onto beams, I want 3/16 of an inch. So take a look here. You have these little side screws on each side of the gun, okay? Those are the set screws for the legs. So I'm going to move this forward some till I've got 3/16. And loosen that one up a little more. Start hanging on that leg. And right about there. Okay. I want to make sure my ferrule is fully seated. Okay, because we're using the ferrule as our, yeah, right about there. Okay, so now I'm at about 3/16. Okay. Okay, so a couple of notes. Gun setup. Gun setup is going to mean the difference between fighting this all day or this going like a breeze, okay? If you want this to be fast, easy, and consistent, pay attention to your gun setup. That you've got free travel here, that it's not binding up, right? See? It's not binding up. And that this depth right here is correct. Too much depth stick out, and you're going to take up too much mechanical travel on the gun, and it won't be able to lift the stud. Because when you push this, when you weld, you're actually it's going to push down like that. So if I have too much sticking out, well, if I push too far down, I'm going to take up all that mechanical travel, so when I pull the trigger, it can't draw the stud up and draw the arc. Secondly, if you don't have enough, you're not going to get enough penetration, and the studs are just going to come right off. So, stick out and right in the middle of the circle. All right, very important. So, now that I'm done adjusting the gun, I'm going to go ahead and turn the welder back on. And just going to do a little check, which it did. And now, board's clear. Shows I've got my 1 second and my 1800 amps. Now I'm going to come on over here. All right. I push down and I make sure that that ferrule, the little seat around the edge there, I make sure that that ferrule is seated properly in that ferrule grip. I push down. See how I do that? See, there's a little spring in the gun. You'll feel it push down against the spring. Now it's flat, and I go ahead and I make sure that it's nice and plumb. Now here's what I do. At this point, when I pull the trigger, I'm gonna close my eyes, okay? This thing here guards from arc rays, but you're still gonna get some arc rays right here. You don't wanna be staring at this thing when you pull the trigger, okay? I don't recommend wearing a hood. I do recommend having safety glasses or a face shield. But anyway, so here we go. We're ready and go. There we go. This is how we know we have a good weld. It is chrome, like an iridescent chrome. Nice shiny, and this is important, glossy, iridescent color. And it goes 360 degrees around the whole base of the stud, okay? Now, let's say that this is gray and rough. Well, it's a cold weld, so you need either more heat or more time. Let's say you've got a big giant blob, you know, of big weld berries all over this thing. Well, you're too hot. Let's bring the time back some first to begin with, okay? As you're welding with this, you'll develop a sense, be able to of what you're hearing. And at first, it all kind of jumbles together, but after you've done it a few times, you'll hear what's going on with the stud. So during the weld process, what you want to hear is a consistent all the way through, okay, from beginning to end. If at the end of the weld process, the weld cycle, you hear a change in the pitch, like it goes, you're too long, your time is too long. You went from just creating a molten puddle and heating it up to a liquid point, which is where we just want to heat it up to liquid. Right now it's in a frozen state. We want to warm it up enough to it's in a liquid state. But if we go too much time or too much heat, what we'll end up doing is overheating it to a gaseous state. And that's when you start getting the weld berries, because the gas leaves the weld zone, it solidifies and drops down and then freezes into a solid matter. Anyway, so what we want to do is, if you hear that change at the end of the weld cycle, and it'll spatter like crazy too, you'll hear it and you'll see it. So what you want to do is just shave off enough time to where you hear that constant sound, and right where it was about to begin to change, shave the time back to that point, and you're at the perfect time, the absolute perfect time. Then check your results, obviously. If you have undercutting, where we've lost some material, we're too hot. If the stud is hanging up, you know, what will happen is you'll see the stud will go partially down, and there won't be very much weld around it. The stud's just kind of got a little part sticking. Check your setup. Make sure your legs didn't get bent. Maybe the gun got dropped or stepped on or something, and now the stud is hanging up. That's a sure sign of a stud hanging up. Let's see, the other thing, and I cannot emphasize enough how important this is. And I wish I would have started with this first, but this is super important, and that's your ground. This is a ground sensitive process. If you have a bad ground, nothing will work. It will be a nightmare. So your ground needs to be on clean steel. If there's rust, grind it off. If there's paint, it absolutely will not work. Grind away the paint. Both sides, top and bottom. We want the screw on clean steel and the bottom of the clamp on the face, you know, the meaty part of the clamp. The most important part to be on clean steel is the meaty part of the clamp where you got the most surface area. So grounding is ultra important. Try to ground away from where you're welding. You don't want to ground too close or you're going to get something called arc flow. Anyway, that's it. That should do it. If you have any questions, please give us a call. 800-252-1919. And just let us know you have a problem with it. I gotta tell you, 9 times out of 10, man, we can figure it out in about 5 minutes over the phone. It's usually something pretty simple. All right, this is David Couch with Stud Welding Products. Thank you very much.